Good morning, friends, students, and lovers of English. This is Professor Dr. Deepika Srivastava from the English Department of the University of Allahabad. I have been posting lectures on English on YouTube regularly, so you know me well by now. Today's lecture is on Jane Austen and her 2 inches of ivory with reference to Pride and Prejudice. Let us get familiar with Jane Austen first. She was born in 1775 at Steventon Rectory as the daughter of a country parson and died in 1817 at the young age of 41 years. She spent her childhood and youth in this obscure place, far from the madding crowd's ignoble strife. She was a Georgian era novelist whose romantic novels, set among the landed British gentry, earned her a place as one of the most acclaimed writers in English literature. Surprisingly, she lived her entire life amongst her family and was educated by her father and older brothers. This contribution and support of her family greatly contributed in her writing skills. Her plots, though basically romantic, highlight the dependence and proclivity of women on marriage to secure social standing and economic security. Working with the extremely limited materials offered by the quiet life around her, she rose to the position of the universally acclaimed mistress of the novel of manners. She never attempted, like other women novelists, to meddle with passions, theories, and styles of writing. She was bred in the country, appreciated natural scenery, and had a primary interest in members of her own family. Hers was a large family and a hospitable one. Her parents and siblings were ready with their appreciation and encouragement of her work. All her novels were read aloud at home. She wrote 6 major novels, namely Sense and Sensibility, published in 1811, Pride and Prejudice, published in 1813, Mansfield Park, published in 1814, Emma, published in 1815. Two novels, Persuasion and Northanger Abbey, were published posthumously in 1870. Jane Austen was introduced to the works of Johnson, Cowper, Goldsmith, whom she admired greatly. Jane Austen started scribbling down imitations of many existing novels. Though her readers see in her a deliberate limitation and narrowness of range in a choice of subject matter, her admirers find her scope quite adequate for the exposition of important themes. Jane Austen is superior to all other women writers and all but a few men writers in English literature as a creator and an artist. The smallness of a scale of operation cannot lessen the perfection of her achievement. She vividly depicted early 19th century English middle class life. Her novels have become timeless classics that have remained popular successes to this date. Strangely, she was not widely known during her lifetime, but her reputation skyrocketed in the 20th century. Today, she is universally admitted to be an English classic, though she has to her credit only half a dozen novels. As said earlier, her field was limited and narrow. She cultivated it with a perfect art. Many have praised the domesticity of Austen's novels. Macaulay likens her to Shakespeare. There is entire galaxy of writers and critics who have admired Jane Austen's novel and art. Austen's experience was meager and insignificant. She herself said, open the inverted commas, the little bit 2 inches long of ivory on which I work with so fine a brush as produces little effect after much labor, I close the inverted commas. She deliberately confines herself within the boundaries of a woman's world. It was all very well for Fielding and Smollett to write about precarious adventure or Sir Walter Scott to write on history, but Jane Austen knew the limitations of a world and powers. She refused to write a Gothic romance. There are no adventures, no abstract ideas, no romantic reveries, no death scenes, no Napoleonic wars, no French Revolution or Industrial Revolution. She did not present man in relation to God, religion, ethics, state, or society. But within her limited and narrow range, she is superb. She discarded new theories of picturesque beauty, which the Romantic movement had introduced both into painting and literature. This is the reason why rocks and streams, mountains, forests, and castles, which are the base of the Romantics, have no place in her novels. Though all Jane Austen's are finished products, refined pieces of fiction, Pride and Prejudice is more praiseworthy because of a well constructed plot, good narration, simple and chaste style, and filigree work on the 2 inches of ivory. Everything smooth and decent without any extreme of any nature, a perfect piece of art. Having said that, let us focus on hers and my favorite novel, Pride and Prejudice, now. It is a most well known novel, a work she referred to as her darling child. A novel of manners, it focuses on the character development of Elizabeth Bennet, the dynamic protagonist who learns about hasty judgments and starts appreciating the difference between superficial and actual goodness. Though it is not the most humane of Austen's novels, it is certainly the most humorously written and the most boldly constructed. In its original form, it was called First Impressions, and being turned down by the first publisher to whom the manuscript was offered, it was ultimately published in 1830. It reveals the clash of two opposing foibles which had to be mellowed before the hero and heroine, who are separated by them, can be brought together. Thus, when Mr. Bingley rents a house, women with eligible daughters make a beeline for him, more so when he is accompanied by Mr. Darcy, who is wealthier and a bachelor. Jane Bennet, Elizabeth's elder sister, and Mr. Bingley become attached to each other, especially through tactical planning of Mrs. Bennet, Jane's mother. However, Darcy angers the local society with his arrogance and disdain. Soon, he gets enamored with the heroine Elizabeth. She is an intelligent, inspirational, lively, and engaging character who doesn't give in to social expectations of the time. The third daughter, Mary, is plain and pompous, while Lydia and Kitty, the two youngest ones, are foolish and totally immature. It's Jane and Elizabeth who are the father's favorites, but the mother, Mrs. Bennet, a woman of little sense, indulges her youngest daughters. Throughout, there is a clash between the pride of rank and fortune and prejudice against social inferiority of Elizabeth's family, which keeps Darcy aloof. Darcy's snobbery holds Elizabeth equally aloof. However, Darcy writes a letter explaining his actions. With these revelations, Elizabeth begins to see him in a new light. Though the novel lacks historical references, it is an accurate portrayal of the enclosed social world in which Austen lived and died. This is depicted in all its narrow pride and prejudice with unswerving accuracy and satire. And the popularity of the novel is largely owing to Elizabeth, who was reportedly Austen's favorite among all her heroines. Elizabeth, for all her intelligence, thinks about little except men in her own family. She is conscious about her superiority over her mother and younger sisters. Her taste cannot be said to be greater than theirs given her partiality at first for the undeserving Wickham. She fails to see through him. Despite these flaws, Elizabeth struggles to maintain her position in the upper class, though her family lacks refined behavior that would ingratiate them with people of higher status such as Bingleys and Darcys. The novel belongs to the genre of realism. There are no political events in the novel. Though realism has now become popular, during Austen's times, novels featured violence, scandals, supernatural, and magical events. She chose the theme of identifying actual goodness behind prejudices and superficial qualities her of a person. The heroine learns about repercussions of hasty judgments and starts appreciating actual goodness. Thus, Pride and Prejudice displays and illustrates dangers of excessive pride and overweening prejudice. Darcy becomes decreasingly proud and Elizabeth less prejudiced. In this moment of self revelation, Elizabeth realizes that there is some justice in what Darcy has said, and there is justice in Darcy's views about her family, except her sister Jane. A crisis is called for, which will break placidity of her reflections, and this comes in the stunning news that Lydia Bennet and George Wickham have eloped. In sheer anguish, Elizabeth blurts this news to Darcy, who is most kind and understanding. Later, after Lydia and Wickham have decided to marry, Elizabeth regrets confiding in Darcy about the elopement. In due time, Elizabeth discovers that it is Darcy who has been instrumental in arranging marriage between the two. Both Elizabeth and Darcy are desirable, but each works against the other. Hence, the reader cannot believe that the marriage of Darcy and Elizabeth, however happy, will ever quite close the breach between these two opposites. In Pride and Prejudice, the hero is prominent, but the villain has an equally significant and convincing part. Both attract the heroine and both receive the marital fates which they deserve. As Elizabeth is a complicated heroine, the two men whom she associates herself romantically must also be intelligent. If Elizabeth takes pride in her prejudices, Darcy's pride also leads to prejudice. One way in which Austen delineates her character is through his relationship with Bingley. It is through this friendship that a completeness is given to Darcy's character. Although we are struck at the beginning of the novel with Darcy's rudeness and pride, we may overlook the solidity of temperament implied in his affection for Bingley. Despite his early bad impression of Elizabeth, he is soon constrained to like her better. It was owing to his rudeness that Elizabeth willingly prefers the pleasant countenance of George Wickham, the most villainous of Jane Austen's anti-heroes. She readily believes the lieutenant's defamation of Darcy's character, though the readers take note of the warning signals which Elizabeth ignores. Jane Bennet cautions her. So does Miss Bingley. Both are correct in their assessment, but Elizabeth does not believe either of them and continues to think well of Wickham and ill of Darcy. Wickham is handsome, persuasive, calculating, and dishonorable, and gradually Elizabeth Bennet guesses full measure of Wickham's evil. His complete misrepresentation of Darcy, his planned elopement with Georgiana, his dissipated existence in London. Her changed perception dates from her second reading of Darcy's letter. Ultimately, Wickham gets the fate which he deserves. He marries Lydia after causing great distress to all concerned, except the foolish young girl herself. Elizabeth is put off by Darcy's rudeness. She allows herself to overemphasize his pride because she comes so dangerously near to involvement with him. She credits Wickham's testimony because it is congenial to her and she wants to avoid entanglement with Darcy. Ultimately, her clarity of vision and perception make her see sense. So, this was a note on the complicated relations between her and Wickham vis-a-vis Darcy. As is noticeable, there are three major themes, but overall message of Pride and Prejudice is that first impressions can be very wrong and misleading. That's the reason why Jane Austen originally called her novel by that name. The three themes of Pride and Prejudice are family, marriage, and class, and all three run throughout the story. The opening line of the novel famously announces, I open the inverted commas, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. I close the inverted commas. This sets marriage as a motive and a problem in the novel. Jane Austen's complex sketching of different marriages depicts what forms a desirable alliance based on economic, sexual, and compassionate alliance. In the case of Charlotte Lucas, success of a marriage lies in the comfortable circumstances of her household, while the relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Bennet serves to illustrate bad marriages based on initial attraction. Although the central characters, Elizabeth and Darcy, begin as hostile acquaintances, they eventually develop a better understanding and fall in love. When Elizabeth rejects Darcy's initial proposal, the element of love marriage is introduced. She only accepts Darcy when she is truly in love with him. The match also solves the other major issue. Mr. Bennet, owner of Longbourn Estate, in Hertfordshire has 5 daughters as already pointed. But his property can be inherited only to a male heir. Thus, it is imperative that at least one, if not all girls, marry well-off groom to support the family. Darcy, being financially strong, is thus a coveted match. Along with the marriage theme, the other two themes are also included in such a move. By accepting Darcy's proposal, Elizabeth has found true love and a coveted place in the society as well. As Austen's novels lack moral concern, the entire scenario is a detached record of commonplace incidents among the gentry of Jane Austen's time and place. Country life was undisturbed. Pride and Prejudice can be considered on three levels. First is the purely local level. Second, it is broad allegory. And third, there is an ironic level. The lower class is omitted totally. As for the aristocracy, the members are greatly satirized. So we are left with the country gentry. Men do not appear except in the company of women. Hence, all emphasis lies on women. We can say that Pride and Prejudice is good but far too circumscribed. Wordsworth admitted that Jane Austen's novels were an admirable copy of social life, but he could not be interested in productions of that kind. The novel has given us a multitude of characters, all in a sense commonplace, but discriminated from each other as if they were the most eccentric of human beings. Pride and Prejudice appears near the top list of most loved books, becoming one of the most popular novels in English literature. For more than a century, dramatic adaptations, reprints, film and TV serials of Pride and Prejudice have depicted the novel's memorable characters, themes and storyline. A Hindi film starring Aishwarya Rai entitled Bride and Prejudice was released in 2004, adapted from Pride and Prejudice, though the film was not a hit. In a sense, the novel is focused on the coming of age of Elizabeth Bennet, hence is a Bill Dunk's Roman. With these words, I conclude my lecture on Jane Austen and her 2 inches of ivory with reference to Pride and Prejudice. I hope you will benefit from listening to it. The lecture will be of great help to those preparing for postgraduate exams, NET, PCS and IAS. Before I sign off, I request you to subscribe, comment and like my video at English by Professor Dr. Deepika Srivastava. Thank you. Have a nice day.